Hey there, Blenderheads, it's MeshWeaver. This is actually a remake of my very first tutorial, the making a Blender logo using curves. And I thought it would be a good idea to just go over the entire thing and just start over and just make it really better than what it was. Because it was really my first tutorial and there was a lot of stuff that I hadn't really learned yet. So let's start up here. I have Blender 2.5 as usual, or as it was originally, and this is actually Blender 2.5 Beta 4, or 2.54 Beta, which is the newest release by the Blender Foundation. Basically, it's a bug fix of Beta 3, but it's good to have the recent versions anyway. The entire tutorial can also very probably be done in 2.49 using pretty much the same techniques. I'm not too sure about the settings and the in the keyboard shortcuts because, to be honest, I haven't used 2.49 in a while. So yeah, let's get started. We have quite a few steps to go through. The intro, which I'm actually doing. I'm going to be going over what curves are and give a few examples of some curves. I'm going to do a few different things, create the logo itself, materials, and setting up the lighting and render settings. So let's just go right in and just click to get rid of this splash, which is the newest splash, and it's pretty cool. Dragon looks kind of funny though. I don't know. Let's just click to get that out of the way. And first off, what I'm going to do is select this camera and then select this lamp as well and just move them onto layer 2. So they're out of the way and we'll be able to deal with those later. So switch to top view using 7 on your number pad, then switch over to orthographic view mode using 5 on the same number pad. And by default, Blender always has the default cube, unless of course you have modified your own user settings, but chances are you still have the cube right there. So let's just delete that cube using X or delete, which is actually back, because in the original tutorial I had a note saying that delete did not work anymore. So it must have been only in Alpha 2, which I used at the time. But delete is back. And what we're going to do is add a Bezier circle. But first, we need something as a reference, because we could of course just make a Blender logo by using the splash screen and just looking at that and trying to go in freehand, which could probably give some interesting results, but that's not what we're going to go for right now. So we want to bring in some reference images. So press N to bring up your properties panel and just toggle down this background images tab, click this box and click add image, and then toggle this down so you can have these options and open up your reference images. Now I have the reference image in my tutorial folder, which is here, right here. Now this picture, I have actually linked the actual picture in the video description below, so just check that out down there. So you can find this image, and it's very clear, and it's also flat compared to the actual splash screen, which you could have seen earlier was kind of tilted. As you can see, it's pretty much tilted away from the viewer, like this is closer than this. Let's just click to get rid of that again. And okay, we basically have our image in, but to make things a bit easier, what we're going to do is recenter this image, or at least try to recenter it as close as we can to these crosshairs here, or the X and Y axis. So just change up these values here, and just try to line up this blue circle with this 3D cursor. At least try to line it up as best you can. So I'd say 1.2 should do it on the Y, and 1.6 seems to be fine. And maybe let's bring up the transparency, or bring down the transparency to 0.4. And then just hide this panel here, which will give us a bit more space to work in. And actually you can hide this one too by pressing T, which is the tool panel. We're going to keep this because there are a lot of things that you can modify as we go. So let's press Shift A to bring up the Add menu, and go into Curve, and don't add a Bezier curve, add a Bezier circle, because it's much easier to start from a circle. So tab into Edit mode using Tab, and then scale up this curved circle here using S, and maybe just try and get it as close as you can to the actual size of the logo, which is pretty much here, or 3.3 if you're using the default size of the picture, which I suggest you do. Because anyway, if you want to resize the actual object afterwards, it's much easier to do that than work with a scaled down picture and try to work at a small scale. It's better to just make it huge and then scale it down. So right now you can see that it has this outline full of little arrows. Now the reason for this is that our curve is set by default to 3D, which we do not want. We are working in 3D, and it will be a 3D model, but what we want is for it to be 2D right now. And I just forgot to don't forget to change this axis, the axis type, over to top, so that if you put it in side view, you don't have the image just sitting there on the from the wrong perspective. I forgot to do that. Let's just toggle this down and then hide that and change this over to 2D, like I said earlier. Now, it just hides the entire thing because it's a solid curve. Now that's a bit problematic. So let's just switch over to wireframe mode, which is a bit easier to see. And actually the transparency of that image is kind of getting on my nerves. Let's move that back up to 0.5 and hide that again. And there are these, right now we have the internal circle or the external circle of the Blender logo pretty much set up. So what we want to do right now, or well, not right now, but now, is to add another Bezier circle. So add circle, and just scale it up to match this interior size here, which is pretty much scale up by 2.05, say, which seems to be fine. And then add another one for this internal blue circle, and just scale it up to, say, 1.33333, which is pretty much 1 1/3. So if you deselect everything and Z back into solid view mode, or just switch it over here, you can now see that we have two individual disks. Because say you delete this loop, oops, not that vertex actually. Let's just select all these, just delete them. It just takes the entire thing and moves it to this inner circle, because that's pretty much how Bezier circles work. And I just realized that I forgot my curve explanation. Great. So let's just leave this for a moment. So what are curves? Well, in this case, curves, because a curve is pretty much a shape, in this case, these curves are actually defined by mathematical formulae. Now, I have a few pictures that I brought up in Google Chrome, and I also have a definition. Now, the best definition in this case is this one. A curve that is defined by a series of control points, which is exactly right. Manipulating the control points reshapes the curve. Yes, Bezier curves belong to a class of curves called splines, which seems to me is correct. I'm not sure, but I think that's what it is, because there's a spline IK function in animation, which I think is for animating along curves or making things follow curves. I'm not sure. I haven't used it yet. But I also have a few pictures of various curves. A sine curve in mathematics, which is this form of curve. You have the sine and cosine curves, just to compare. Basically the same shape, only one is offset. And you also have a tangent curve, which is pretty much this. And these are, again, mathematical formulae more used in trigonometry and stuff like that. And let's just continue, well, not exactly modeling, but I'll just call it modeling because it is a 3D model. So yeah, curves are mathematical functions graphed into or not graphed, more represented by a flowing curve. So that's exactly what we're working with, and it's much more visible with a Bezier curve instead of circle, but that's not really the main object here. So let's select these 4 external handles, because these are control points. And oh, okay, that's interesting. It selects the entire circle as well as the handle. So right now, if you try and take these handles, or even just one of them, if you move it around, yeah, okay, you can move it wherever you want. But if you move the entire thing, these two automatically readjust to make the curve as smooth as possible. So if I'm bringing it over here, it'll just smooth everything out, and that's because it is set to a certain setting. So this is actually fine for now because we want to keep these circular shapes, but in here we will have to do a bit of tweaking. So if we try and move this over here, it kind of distorts the entire thing, which we do not want. So select your 4 control handles. You can use the circle select brush here, which is kind of useful. And actually I forgot the control points here. And press H. Now H is usually to hide stuff, but if you press H here, you can turn these into individual types of handles. Like right now they're all orange or pink or mixer of the two, and you can move each handle of each control point individually, which means it will not readjust this to make the curve smooth. You can basically do whatever you want. Now, we don't necessarily want this for every single one. Let's select these two and press H again, which gives us a curve that will readjust itself to make the curve as smooth as possible as earlier, except it doesn't readjust the other ones. Like if I move this over here, the other ones stay in their positions. So this is fine for these two because we want this nice circular shape. This one we actually keep on the pink lines because we want to be able to just take this wherever we want. And this one we keep the same way. Or we could just make them all the same, just so it's less confusing. And the next step is to make our curve non-cyclic. Now, cyclic is a cycle. Actually, let's look it up so I can get a much better definition than what I'm managing right now. Define cyclic. Conforms to a cycle. So, yeah. So let's make this non-cyclic. So let's select these handles, again with the circle select, which works pretty well, and press C. And actually, no, Alt-C. And what did that do there? That was interesting. Okay, so I accidentally selected this curve here, but I don't want that. I just want these. No. Alternate C, for crying out loud. So we can see that right here, we have this curve that now is not connected. And good news is, it kept the perfectly circular shape for the 3/4 of this circle. But we have a problem here that this is not supposed to be here. It's supposed to be all the way over here. So let's select this circle, rotate it around, and bring this this connected edge over here, so basically 90 degrees, so that we now have this edge right at this joint. And this one, we're actually going to have a bit of trouble getting it perfect. So what you want to do is switch over your pivot point to 3D cursor if it's still at the center here. If it's not, just go into your properties panel and go down into view and just change the 3D cursor location to 0 on all 3 axes. And now rotate your curve and just bring it somewhere along here. It's basically 25 degrees. Now you can see that this can cause problems. And why? There's something going on here. I'm not in wireframe mode. Oh, okay. I get it. So the problem here is that this curve is not cyclic. But if you look at over here, you have this curve that's coming out. So what you want to do is, first off, cancel your control pivot and put it back to median point, and just maybe rotate this, or maybe even these two, and just move them so that the curve is as close to the outline of the circle as possible, which kind of seems to be working right now.